In this episode, I'm happy to introduce Mariam Awori, Interim Managing Director and Advisor for Meaningful Engagement of People with Lived Experience at Azadi, a survivor-led organization in Kenya. Mariam will speak about ethical storytelling in human trafficking. Over to you, Mariam.
All right. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for the wonderful introduction. And my topic for today is going to be ethical storytelling in survivor leadership. And, and before we even start talking about ethical storytelling, we need to talk about narratives. And when we talk about narratives, what are narratives? Narratives are generated by stories, images, and often generated over a period of time. And in most cases, narratives are the things that become knowledge that is perpetuated, and they give you a picture or a landscape of the social justice issues. And by studying this narrative, then you get a better understanding of the systemic issues. And they are used as tools and bases that perpetuate systems. And when you look at storytelling, this is a quote that is a quote from the book called Homegoing by Yagyasi. It talks about, we believe the one who has the power is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth? Once you have figured that out, you must find that story too. From there, you get a clearer, yet still imperfect picture. And when you talk about ethical storytelling, the people that have been impacted by the issue should be the center of their stories and not the other way around as traditionally has been done. And the solution to this is meaningful inclusion as well as seeding power. Seeding power just means sharing power with the story, with the storyteller, with the person who has the lived experience, and the person who is sharing the story outside there. And when you talk about narrative, there's the impacts that narrative have on public perceptions. And I'll talk about an example of Kenya and how narratives have significantly shaped both public perceptions and influence policies. And I have specific examples. The first one is the victim narratives. And when you look at this narrative, it has had impact on perceptions. This looks like how survivors are portrayed as helpless, as people who need rescue and charity. And these narratives not only does it evoke pity, but it also reinforces the sense of dependency, undermining that survivors have agency and resilience. And on policy, this implication on this narrative tend to focus on the immediate aspect of survivor of survivor support. This is rescue and rehabilitation, and this does not give room for long-term support. And long-term support can be like economic empowerment or systemic prevention measures. And this approach overlooks survivors' potential to be able to lead the anti-trafficking initiatives. And there's also the narrative of the heroic survivor, where stories of survivors nowadays are becoming how survivors overcome adversity and becoming advocates and leaders and inspire both communities and policymakers. But however, this puts a lot of pressure on survivors that are still not able to meet this ideal that has been set. And when we look at some of the impacts that it can have on policy, this may prioritize leadership training and advocacy, which is a nice thing and it's really good. But at the same time, it is going to neglect those who need other forms of support, which may be in form of mental health care or vocational training. And there's this narrative of framing trafficking as a foreign issue. So sometimes in Kenya, trafficking is framed as an issue that is external, and we don't look at what is internal. And this is an example many people can relate to. And this in turn overshadows domestic trafficking because you see most cases, we have people trafficked in tea farms, in flower farms, and because it's looked at as a foreign issue, they are not able to get the support that they need or the help that they need internally. And on policy, you find that resources are mainly allocated in border security and international collaboration, with less attention being given to addressing the domestic issues of trafficking, particularly in rural areas. I've given an example of places like coffee farms, tea farms, and flower farms. So this shows us how like a specific narrative can perpetuate systems that are not mainly inclusive and supportive of stories of people who have the lived experience and have been impacted by the issue itself. And why is all this important? Why is ethical storytelling important? It is important because it builds this connection between the person who is telling the story and the person who bears the story. Because not everybody can be able to stand and tell the story. But if you listen well to someone, then there's this collaboration between the storyteller and us, people who are listening to the story. And ethical storytelling does not see people as someone can be a single thing. It sees people as multifaceted, whole human beings with multiple stories and identities. If someone is a survivor of human trafficking, they can be something else. They can decide to tell stories of their childhood. They can decide to tell stories of their families, and their experience does not define the stories they must tell. And when we engage with people with lived experience, we need to think of them as whole human beings that have different stories to their experiences. And ethical storytelling also allow the storyteller to reflect: what stories are you telling, and what power are you using to tell them? And this gives the people the power to just determine how do people want their own stories to be told. If you look at how traditionally people's stories have been told, it's been sensationalized. Pardon me, English is not my first language. In a way that we don't see the whole person, we just see their experience. But ethical storytelling recognizes and it amplifies and it sees survivors, people who have lived the experience of human trafficking, as storytellers, as co-creators, because lived experience is expertise and lived experience is knowledge. And it allows people, the people that have the lived experience, to reclaim agency and the power of telling their own stories in their own way, how they would like it to be told, without it being influenced by others. And this is a quote from a survivor leader that went through the Azadi Ethical Storytelling Fellowship. Our stories are being misinterpreted and manipulated. We give a version of a story and someone gets another version of the story. So having ethical storytelling means coming in means you don't have to be the main character in the story, which works well for me. As I've said, sometimes the story can be, someone can tell about the story of trafficking, but not centering themselves in the story. And just to give a brief about the ethical storytelling fellowship, because maybe this is something different people might be interested in trying or practicing in their own organization. So how it started in Azadi, this was during the COVID period when there was lockdown and survivors, of course, many people, everyone was affected. We were all affected with the lockdowns, with the economic struggles, but survivors were mostly affected considering there was no funding, and most of them, this is what they depended on their livelihood. So a team of experts at Azadi, the founder of Azadi, Sophie Ochende, with a team of experts, worked virtually with survivors of human trafficking, taking them through the training of photography, storytelling, and research. And this project was implemented with the realization that survivors' different experiences are misinterpreted due to this lack of inclusion and power dynamic, but also lack of trained survivors. Because if somebody does not have the basic training, they themselves won't understand how to tell the story in an ethical way. And in an effort to change this unequal and exclusive storytelling structure, we are intentionally building a narrative here at Azadi, and some of the work that we have done is at our website and our digital archive. This narrative projects have been proved that survivors can be subjects, can be authors, can be critics of their own stories. After we've had successful physical and virtual exhibitions held in 30th of July in 2021 as a result of the project conducted in 2020. So the fellowship started with 19 survivor leaders and 4 allies, which is the trainers and survivors. And they went through a training on writing, art, and participatory photography, with each person having the same tools to look at this story and think about what are we doing in our work to tell survivor stories in a way that their voice are included. Come to the end of my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening to this webinar, and I pass it back to the wonderful Sylvia for summary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariam, for this insightful presentation. We close this episode here, reminding those who are watching that this webinar series is made possible thanks to the voiceover project that is co-funded by the European Union. And it's a project aimed at amplifying the voices of individuals with lived experience of human trafficking and to foster their meaningful dialogue and participation on these critical topics. Now, be sure to check out other episodes and continue to explore ways to empower people with lived experience, survivor leaders, and promote ethical, trauma-informed, and impactful practices. See you next time.